I'm going to talk about an idea that stems again from the problem with idolatry and hero worship. And I'm going to start with the story of Noah. So, of Noah, we know that he had five children, and after he passed away, I think one of them wasn't saved, and along with his wife. But actually, that's probably a good segue into it because we know that they drowned because they thought that they could find something in the world to save them outside of what Noah was trying to preach, that there's a bigger force in the world and that's what you should align with if you want to, have a successful life. But Noah's son, he was adamant that he didn't need to get on the ship, for example, that if there was a flood, that he could just climb to the highest mountain and that would save him. He drowned, he didn't end up surviving. And the story goes on that after they made it back to shore and they lived for however many years they lived after that, five of Noah's sons had sort of monuments erected of them, almost to remind the people that come after that these were people who were pious, who survived a time that was very difficult for people to align with the teachings of Noah. And we are putting up these monuments so that we can remember these stories and remember the lesson, and then hopefully we won't have trouble in the future. So this tends to happen, as you were kind of noticing the theme here, is that it happens that people remember the story, they remember the significance for a few years, and then because it's an oral tradition, and even now things are recorded, we lose a lot of the context and the nuance. So it's almost to say that it's really hard to keep anything preserved in time, which is kind of a good thing because um, it keeps us kind of trying to always grapple with our contemporary time and rely on ourselves rather than just whatever history had in some kind of preserved form. So anyway, what happened is after some time, people started to wonder if are we supposed to be worshiping these people because they look like they all have different attributes or different characteristics that characterize who they are. So in the chapter, there's a chapter in the Quran called Noah, and in it there's actually a reference where one person, he's actually saying, "Don't leave these people. Like, these are your gods." And they called them. I think one of them was called love, and then one of them was like almost fierce, um, and one was to say maybe. Kind of like, do you know how some people are like very adventurous? So maybe that was one of them. And the other one was one that you can go to call for help. And one was maybe one to kind of give you like vision, so almost like long-term range. Now, if you actually read these names, they sound like they could be Arabic, but I don't know the language. I'm just approximating, kind of like when I said with Arabic and English. Sometimes if you approximate certain sounds, you can say, hey, in Arabic, this almost sounds like this word. So maybe that's what it means. So wed is kind of closeness, right? In Arabic, it means that. But it also means love, because when you love somebody, you're intimate with them. You want to be close with them. So this is the way I kind of make sense of how I read the scripture, because I have a little bit of Arabic background and I understand English. So then I try to put the two together just for my own way of remembering things. And then I wonder, like, what is it about these characteristics in people that people like? Like, we all want love. We all want to be fierce, means we want to be like persevering. If we feel strongly about something, we want to defend it. We want to have adventurous attributes, which means we always want to go and explore. And then we always want to know that there's a way for us to call for help if we need help, that we should rely on people. But over and above that, we should rely on the universe, because there's clearly something bigger than any human being or a collection of human beings. And then we want to be somebody who thinks for the future and plans for the future. So all of these things are almost like, wow, this is a really cool way of thinking about all the things that we should try to set goals for ourselves as. So anyway, with these almost like five idols as they became, we kind of understand that, okay, maybe if somebody told me you should worship somebody or you should be friends with somebody or you should rely on somebody, it could be, okay, I mean, let me think about this in a long-term way. They are going to die because we all know that people die. So what am I supposed to do after they die? Right? So then it's like, yeah, that's true. You can't really help me. And then you can think, what if they get sick? Yep, they actually might need my help. So then you think, okay, then they can't help me. And then you think, well, and then you kind of just thinking for a little bit. You're like, so what in the world can help me? Like, I'm so used to maybe a concrete way of thinking where I need something in front of me and I need an example in front of me to help me almost understand what is it about the world that I need, that's going to keep reminding me that God exists in a world that I cannot comprehend, that I cannot see, but I know exists. And that's a very difficult thing to think about and to realize, but that's when we almost know that because we're asking these questions, God's already helping us. Because God says, if you come to me walking, I'll come to you running. This is a metaphor or like an abstract idea that you're not going to be left alone. If you're just trying, God's going to find a way to inspire you that's going to be in a way that you're able to think about for your time. So if you're a younger person, you might need to understand this in a different way than somebody who's older. And maybe that's not true. Maybe an older person needs to understand it in a simpler way than maybe somebody who's younger. And it's difficult to say because who knows how everyone's learning style is and how different they are. Now, think of somebody who doesn't know anything about religion, anything about thinking about the universe, and they're brand new to any of these ideas. And they are somebody who's maybe, I'm going to say they're 35 or 36. So you might think, oh, like you should know something, but maybe they don't. Maybe they lived in an area where it's very far away. There's not very much technology, or even if there is technology, the technology was always there to kind of support a way of thinking that didn't make them think about the universe because they never really went outside a lot. So then it would be like, well, then how can I? And they want to be your friend, right? So they see that you're engaging with the world, you're trying to explore nature, and you're trying to understand how do I make sense of understanding God in a way that I don't have to talk about, but I have to feel it and I have to believe it. So what if they come up to you and they say, I want to be your friend? You can be like, okay, sure. So you want to be friends and you're starting to talk about everything. And then they say, I'm trying to build a human robot. So can I be you and you be the robot? Okay. And then you're like, wait, I don't understand what that means. So then they'll say, I will press a few buttons on my phone and I'm going to pretend that now, so let's pretend this boy, his name is Jack. Okay. And then he'll say, you be Jill. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to test this out and see what you're trying to tell me. And then he'll say, now I'm going to change now and I'm going to be Paul. Now, because now you're Jack, the robot is going to be Jill. And you're just like, but I didn't change. I'm still me. I'm still Jill. You're like, no. You have to be Jack now because now I'm going to be Paul. So now you're Jack and now Jill is going to be nobody, but it's going to be you. And I'm going to try to make something out of Lego or like some kind of technology that's going to trace your body and it's going to tell you how to move. So you're like, but I already move. Like, why would you want to do that? And that's where it's confusing with technology and robots because people are thinking of new ideas and they're like, this is the only way I know how to make sense of how to think like you. So then you have to say, okay, I understand what you're trying to build, but what happens if I die? I don't wake up from my sleep. What happens to your technology? And then they'll be like, oh yeah. Like, yeah, you're going to have to start thinking again. And you can't just accept any other body because what if somebody else says no? Are you going to think that God died then? And then that's it. You're just going to lose hope. It's like, okay, well, that's a beginning idea. I have to think of something else now. So it's like, yeah, that's true. Now I'm going to be Jill again and you be Jack. Now how can you think? And then they probably be like, well, I don't know. And then you can start to ask about their interests. Say, well, what do you like to do in your free time? And then they'll say, well, I like to play video games. And sometimes, I go outside and I find out what my neighbors are doing. And maybe I go to work after that. Then you can say, well, what kind of video games do you like to play? And then they'll tell you, I like to maybe play ones that show me how to build different cities or different towns. So then you can be like, oh, okay, so you do like to kind of build. That's cool. That's kind of like Lego. And then you can say, well, what do you like to do when you go to work? And they'll say, I like to see all the things that people love to buy, and then I order them, and then I put them on the shelf, and I put them in a display that makes it easy for people to buy off the shelf. So I like to keep things tidy. Like, okay, so you like organization and you like building. So now you're understanding who this person is, what they like, how you can learn to try to understand with them in an abstract way, so that now you're learning the concrete things, and then you're going to say, okay, now think, for example, that God knows that this is the way your brain thinks, and he does know, but this person doesn't know how to think about God yet. He's thinking about a person. He's looking for a person in the world to call God. And this is basically what some people understand about Jesus and Ezra. Like I mentioned in the last video, they're trying to find a person to call God. They don't think of God as somebody who's not really a person, but it's a word that we describe, or that we use to describe a big idea in the world. That's why some people don't even like to say a word that, when they describe this existence. They just say there's a supreme being in the world, and that's it. They won't call it God, because then it confuses people. So then you'll think, okay, I'm going to ask you to build an idea in your mind. So now this person's like, okay, so you have to ask me to use my imagination. Like, yeah, so we're going to think abstractly now. So he's like, okay. Then you think, now imagine the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Like, okay. So, and then he might say, I don't remember the story. So then you'll go on YouTube maybe, and you'll look up the story and you'll watch it together. And then you'll say, to me, as Jill, this is a story that is an abstract idea. That if you are curious about what's up in the universe, if you're calling on God because you're asking for help or you're asking for inspiration, it could almost be like having a seed of some kind, and you're planting it in your heart, and you're asking for inspiration. And that inspiration is like coming down the vine, or you climbing up the vine and finding something that's going to help you give an answer to your question. So now they're like, oh, that's called an analogy. An analogy is almost like a story that looks like it parallels another story. And one of these stories is actually a true meaning, that's reality. And the other one is, it might have happened in the past. It might have been something that somebody made up. But the point of it is to help you think in an abstract way, and almost tell you a lesson that you can learn, so that you can be like, oh, now I can think about something in a brand new way that I never would have thought of before. And in this way, you understand why people who really like literature or like language don't often know how to talk about science, because science doesn't have any of this. It has, this is what I see. I can change it. I can measure it. I can put things together, and then I can view the results, and then I can write the results. And then people who come after me, if they try it, they're going to find the exact same thing all the time. It's different from a story. Like if I tell you that story about Jack and the Beanstalk, some people will say, no, it actually happened for real life. You actually plant it, and then you'll watch it, and it will keep growing until it can't grow anymore. But then you think, well, what's going to hold it up? Because some trees, they can grow, and they have, but they have to have like a really, really solid trunk so that it can hold it, so that the wind doesn't flop it back and forth. So now you understand how stories are different than science, because science helps you measure, and stories help you imagine. So if you put the two together, you can say, yeah, you kind of do need the two of them, because if you're trying to guess at something, you almost have to imagine it, and then you have to use numbers, and science, and then you have to try to figure out, is my imagination something that I can build or not? And if it's not something you can build right away, maybe it's something that you have to wonder about, that's outside of the universe, which is kind of closer to what's actually inside your heart, which is your faith. So it's difficult to understand how to talk about this in a way that doesn't really take away from putting science and literature apart, because sometimes you have to understand something separately, like science, for example, separately, and then you understand math separately, and then you understand language separately, and then you try to put the two or the three together, and then you see, oh, we actually do use all three together, but sometimes we forget and we focus on just one of them, and we don't know how to almost decide, like, if I like just science, can I go and study just science and forget about the stories and the math? And then you'll find, well, usually that's what it looks like, but you can try to find maybe a new way of building a job or a life or a way of studying that incorporates all three. And the reason I'm talking about this video right now is because I'm having trouble with a friend of mine who I used to work with, and who understands from somebody else that God is an actual person in the world. And they, because they worked with me, for example, they think that God, this other person, I'm going to pretend, I'm going to use props here. So I'm going to use different colors so that we're not confused. Okay, so this is me, right? And I'm working, this is Hiba, and I'm working at a dollar store. And I'm going to find a friend that works with me, and his name is going to be Bob. Okay, now Bob, he's kind of just like, he doesn't know anything about me yet. So he's just like, oh, hi Hiba, my name's Bob, and I heard a lot about you. So I'm kind of confused. I'm like, what on earth? I just met you. How do you know anything about me? He's gonna say, no, I know Rebecca. And Rebecca told me that she is your God. So I'm like, whoa, what? I'll say, yeah. She told me that she can tell you in your mind all the things that you are doing and thinking, and that's why you understand so much about life. So I'm like, that's really confusing because, first of all, I don't think I know Rebecca. Second of all, how is she supposed to tell me, and how does she tell you, and how do I not know about this? Like she should tell me then, so I should know about it. So then already I'm really confused, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna wait here and think about this with you. So let's continue going on, and then you just kind of forget about it, and you're going through your day, and you're like, okay, I have to learn what I'm doing at my job right now. And so he goes and explains, and then he comes to me and he says, okay, you did this wrong, right? Because Rebecca is saying that you should have done it this way. And I'm like, well, how on earth was I supposed to know? Nobody told me. And they're like, but she is saying that she's your God and she's telling you. I'm like, but this kind of proves my point that she's not my God. I have my own brain and I'm thinking, and you didn't tell me, and she's trying to tell me I didn't know. How am I supposed to know now? So now you see why people are confused when people call themselves God and why they shouldn't call themselves God, because it's already showing you that you're very limited in what you can do. You can't possibly be God, because look at what God does. And inspiration that comes to people in the form of angels is not God. It's not even people. It's actually just an idea that comes to your mind. And if it comes to your mind and you go and tell somebody, if it's a good idea, then maybe, an angel inspired you in some way and then it left again, because it doesn't stay with a person forever. It just comes and it goes depending on what your mood is for the day and if you have a good intention for the day or not. So if I decide, no, I think I believe that Rebecca's your God, I'm going to say, okay, I'm sorry that you believed in that, but from what I understand about tradition is that people who make partners with actual God like that, God gets very angry with them, because he says you're actually lying to yourself and you're lying to that person by believing her, because now she's going to start to believe that she's God, and she's going to go around lying to other people and trying to make them believe something that's not true. So God says this is the worst of all things, is to set up a partner with God, or it's called idolatry, is to build an idol. You're building yourself as an idol. I guess this person, Rebecca, she'd be building herself as an idol and making people try to believe something that's not true. So God says, I won't forgive this of all things unless you stop. And then you're not responsible for all the other people who believed everything you did. How are you going to go back and correct all of that? Especially if God's standing in the way and saying, no, you're going to have to pay for this for a long time. Like maybe one lifetime after another lifetime after another lifetime, because you made such a huge mess with what you thought was a good idea. So now you understand why it's a big deal when people say, I saw you do a superpower. I bet you're God. And then you have to remind yourself, say, no, I am not God. God is giving me a strength and he's testing me to see how I use it. But I know that God can take it away from me. And that's it. Now, if somebody tries to tell you that you're God and you're like, no, but then they'll say, but you are strong. Then you can say, I know, but that's okay if I'm weak too. That way, if somebody else comes back to you and says, you're not strong anymore, you don't feel bad about it. Or you feel like, I have to prove that I am strong. You might feel disappointed and say, oh yeah, I used to be. Some things I am strong at. Sometimes I need to take a break. Because this is basically what's called ego. And ego is a thing that's very difficult to understand within us or even to explain. But it's a part of us that always wants to look like it's doing its best and that it can do something better than anybody else. And ego is a healthy thing if you're thinking about God, because if you are, then you almost don't need it. You're almost like, God, I'm happy that you take away my ego and you tell me that you are the one that gives me all the strength. So it's almost like you remind me that I have to be humble and that I have to be grateful for everything you've given me, and that if people recognize something good in me, that's from you. And if they recognize something that I need to work on, I'm glad, because then I can build a challenge and I can build a goal and I can find a way to find people to support me, or I can just help myself and ask for inspiration from you. So in this way, you're always feeling like you're centered and you're aligned with the universe in a healthy way that is not going to disappoint you. So sometimes if we build these high expectations about ourselves because of what other people tell us, it can actually delude us. It can make us think something about ourselves that's not true. And that's really hard to overcome because we tend to believe what people tell us about ourselves. And if we're not careful to say, wait, is that true about me? And then you can go and test it and then say, no, I mean, it's kind of true. It's kind of not. I like that you think kinds of things about me. And then just stop there. Because if you start to think too many big ideas about yourself, it's actually very, very dangerous. And especially if you don't know how to stop yourself yet and say, no, wait, I haven't learned how to do that yet. And even if I have learned, you know what, maybe an angel inspired me, and it's just so that I can test myself and say, maybe that's a strength I want to build. And maybe it's something I don't really need as a strength because I don't want to be somebody who's always seeking adventure and maybe climbing, really high mountains all the time. Maybe it's just a fun experiment if I'm on the playground. So I'm going to leave it at that because idolatry is something that comes and goes throughout the lifespan. And it's almost like one of the things we understand is that the devil in us, as it were, that tries to delude or like in people or that negative energy in the world, it's always, its first goal is always to create idol worship. So it's always a way to say, I'm the only one that can love God, and I bet you I can make you not love God, and I can make God not love you. And the only way to do that is to make you think that you're God, or to think that you can be better than God, or that other people can worship you as God. And it's going to keep doing that over and over and over and over, so that at the end, the devil, or what we call Iblis or the Jinn, can say, see God, I am the one that's the best. I'm the one that loves you the most. You should have let me be the one that Adam worshipped or bowed down to. And that's basically what it is. It's always that competition between Jinn and humans. And God already said, Jinn, I'm sorry, but I made the humans to be creative. You're allowed to believe too as Jinn, but Jinn and humans are never going to be the same because one's made from earth, which is clay, and one's made from fire. And that's what pride is again. It's to try to assume that one has to be better than the other when God's just saying you're just different creations and it's okay to be different. You're allowed to have that diversity because I created you that way. So just something to think about again. So desire is not something we're talking about. Pride is something we're talking about. And now ego. Ego is something that always wants to be popular. And it wants to be popular in a way that makes it always look like it can't find within itself ways to love itself. So if I love myself and find that other people love me sometimes and don't want to spend time with me sometimes, that's a healthy ego because it means I'm popular, but I don't have to be popular all the time because people's ideas change, the things people like change. If I'm popular with God, that's the best thing because I already know God is never going to leave me.